My name's Owen Pagan, one of the founders of Morphis, which is an Oracle Forms modernization application, which we convert Oracle Forms to Ext JS. So during this afternoon, what I'm hoping to cover is just exactly what Morphis does, how it works, give you a demonstration of the product, and then just work through how your organization interacts with us to get into project mode on a forms conversion project. Okay, so what is Morphis? Essentially, we write code that writes code, and we use legacy Oracle Forms as the source for that code. And essentially, we regenerate it into web and mobile applications using the Ext JS framework. So it's essentially a development kit, an automated application, which is drag and drop, which we're going to show you, which is the form coming just dragged into the engine, and it runs the conversion process. And then it's essentially a platform and a software developer kit to then bring that up to full application standard. So our conversion process gets it a big chunk of the way there, really, really quickly, like in seconds, in minutes, not in days, hours. And then you're basically putting a services wrapper around that, where your organization is going into project mode and building out the application from there. So what we're doing, converting legacy technology, so a two-tier application like Oracle, which is all the Java downloads and the limitations in terms of running it on the web, and it's converted into a modern mobile HTML5 and JavaScript, obviously in the framework, but it's mobile. A mobile version comes out and a desktop application version comes out at the same time. So it's actually really quick for you to go and deploy mobile applications from Oracle Forms or move the whole desktop application onto from an Oracle Forms application. It's drag and drop. It converts the front end and the back end logic. So there are converters out there that do some sort of work on the front end and move it towards, say, in technologies like Apex. But what we actually do is, it's moving to native web, and it's the front end and the back end logic. So that's really critical when you're converting old legacy applications where people may or may not understand what the business rules are from the initial build. And we take that logic, strip it out of the form, repackage it all up, put it in the database, and essentially you're able to reuse that logic again and again without your developers ever having to write a line of code to sort of rewrite the back-end engine. Critically, it moves the application from a two-tier to a three-tier application. So, we had a previous version of the converter, which is essentially two-tier. So you're putting a nicer dress on it. It's a web front end, but it's not actually a change in the architecture. And in terms of going forward and maintaining the code, it would be more difficult to maintain in that model. So it converts it from two-tier to three-tier and allows you to really quickly deploy applications on mobile cloud SaaS deployments. So where we do have a sweet spot and where we're talking a lot to is ISVs, so independent software vendors who have an old Oracle Forms application which people don't want to buy as a new piece of technology, and they obviously can get to a really good looking modern web application really quickly using this technology. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking something on the left, which is an Oracle form, and we're converting it straight away out of the box to something on the right. Now, maybe what's on the right isn't actually what you'd want your user. You need to re-engineer that to get users and sort of re-engineer processes within the application. And essentially that's where the partnership with Sentia comes in, where they can provide the expertise around that. And we'll talk a little bit later on some of that stuff. So at a very high level, that's essentially what we're doing. So how does it work? Well, I suppose, as we've said, we're consuming the FMB file, the Oracle form, and we're consuming it in its XML structure. So we convert the Oracle form, just export it into XML, and then we're parsing the XML data. And essentially what we're doing then is, from that data that we're parsing, we're creating a Sentia UI. There's a Java persistence layer as the mid-tier. The Oracle database is obviously there. Now it's just a newer upgraded version of the Oracle database. There's conversion reporting, which comes out of the conversion process, which is essentially to help the project team, the development team who are going to take the application on a stage further to say, okay, we have converted this, we've converted this, we haven't potentially converted something else. So they can really rapidly find out what the things are which they need to focus on. And then it programmatic APIs, which you can customize then during the conversion process. So for example, if there's some really specific Oracle Forms logic or very Oracle Forms functionality which has been written into the client's forms, they can actually sort of work on some of that stuff themselves if it's not in the engine. If it's in the engine, or if it needs to be built in the engine, we can build it in. So you've moved from something which is relatively, it's a two-tier system, and we convert it into something where there's full source code at a database layer, at the mid-tier persistence layer, and the user interface layer. So the resultant architecture is really developer friendly, and it means that you can take, the application isn't just, okay, we've had to compromise here, we had to compromise in terms of maintainability of the code in order for us to just get off this old legacy technology. What we've actually provided is a future-proof platform. It's just a standard web application, thereafter standard web framework. It's very familiar to anybody who's working in these technologies, and it's easier to enhance and maintain going forward. So just in terms of when we are actually moving from Oracle Forms towards Sentia, what exactly are we mapping? Well, on an Oracle form, you obviously have, it's quite old, it's very old technology, and it's got a form, and inside the form there's blocks, and inside the blocks then there's items. So an item is like a lookup field or a button or whatever it is, and then they're calling triggers, which are then firing off to the database. So when we map that across, we're mapping it onto the generated Sentia UI structure. So you've got the Sentia application, the form view into the grid or the form, mapping onto the column and the field, and putting event handlers on those, which in turn then hit the database, where we've stripped the logic from the form and we've packaged it up as a procedure and deployed that into the database. So that's essentially what's happening during the conversion process. In terms of the tiers, and just to explain, moving from a two-tier, so in an Oracle Forms world, we've got an Oracle form, and all the logic is pretty much written into the Oracle form. That's the way the technology is. It's a two-tier architecture. So there's some logic in the database, but then there's obviously data in the database. Now what we're doing is, when we are converting, we're putting obviously the front-end piece into the Ext JS, and then we've got the logic in the database still to a degree, PL SQL packages and procedures. And then in the persistence layer, which is key for going forward, on conversion, we move some of the logic up to the mid-tier, which is, things like show hide functionality. Some of the UI functionality goes to the mid-tier. So not everything is hitting the database. But because we're putting in the persistence layer here, what essentially happens is we create a jar file per form that's converted, okay, in the persistence layer. So that Java file, as it starts off, is essentially a pass-through layer. So we're still hitting logic in the database, but as you modernize the application and you move forward, it provides you the opportunity to move the logic up into the mid-tier of the application, into the jar files, and retire it from the database, okay? So you're decoupling the front end and the mid-tier ultimately away from an Oracle database over time. You've got essentially you've an architecture now which is extremely maintainable, and you can retire your back-end logic functionality from the database up to the mid-tier. We've a future-proof platform that you can develop future applications on using that. And in terms of, people often ask us, look, all of the logic which is sitting at the database layer, that's going to have a performance issue on our web application. Now we've benchmarked it, and it doesn't, as a rule, have a performance issue. It's hitting the database, but it doesn't, because of just the way Oracle databases work and the performance you get out of them. But if there is any sort of performance issue on a post-conversion world, what you've actually got is, you've got the infrastructure to migrate your PLSQL up into Java as you go. And over time, you're basically moving it away from the database and up towards the mid-tier. All right. Okay. So just in terms of just showing you what Morphis actually is and how it works, it is a drag and drop sort of user front end to get the conversion running. And as I've said, there's stages in the conversion. So we're uploading an FMB file, which is an Oracle form, okay? It's converting it through to XML. So the XML process, that whole conversion piece, just, it's exported to XML. But we're then parsing the XML, and we're going through and looking for all the attributes and all the pieces which we're stripping out. So we're getting the logic out of it. We're creating the different front-end components from the UI piece. It's just constantly parsing through that. And all the knowledge, everything which we can convert is coming from that kind of raw source data. So what that does then is it packages up into a zip for download, and then we can deploy that up on a web server. So in terms of just showing you, okay, so there's just a kind of a landing page, which if you're mid-project sort of shows you everything which you're doing from a conversion perspective, gives you an idea of what you've converted. Okay. This is running unbelievably slowly here for all of a sudden. Okay, so I'm going to drag the form in here. So we just drop the form in. It always happens during a demonstration. Okay, I'm just going to come back to that because it was running really fast earlier on. I think it might be something with the Wi-Fi, but I'll come back to it. Okay, so we're moving from something that's on the left to something which is on the right. Okay, so we're moving from the legacy old technology to the converted form, which is up there, and it's not out of the box an actually completed web application which has full usability for all of the users. It's something which obviously we need to put a service around to bring it up to a web application, and that's where our partnership with Sentia comes in. So what we are is we're experts in terms of building forms, in terms of building the engine, constantly evolving the engine, getting more and more capability in there. But what we do with Sentia is, Sentia obviously the experts in terms of designing, developing, testing all the services around deploying, a modern web application. So we're talking to, say, potentially guys who have airline ERP systems, and they're re-engineering their processes to work across mobile platforms, desktop to mobile, the whole works. And they need to have expertise in to help them do that, because up to this, they've essentially been maintaining an application which was built, maybe 15 years ago. So how do we run a conversion project? How do we engage with client organizations in order to get, got the right tools, the right people and process to get to the point where you're reusing this valuable asset, which is an application, and you're able to reuse it and deploy it as a modern web app. So the starting point is really, organizational requirements, understanding what they are, and a concept of a project. So is this something that we really want to do? Is it something that the organization has an appetite for? So the typical drivers which ISV comes with, an independent software vendor, is, look, we've got an Oracle Forms application. The market doesn't want to buy Oracle Forms. We need to get off this Forms application really quickly, and we're trying to find the right web technology to migrate to. And that's sort of driver number one. If it's an internal application in a large organization and they're saying, look, we've got something here, it's out of support from a browser perspective, which Oracle Forms is as of now for and Chrome. We've got to move off this. It's not a corporate standard anymore, and we've got to move to a new platform. And really, it's establishing what's the appetite for a project, how the organization can staff that project on the other side, what sort of skills they need, that sort of thing. So from our point of view, the next stage is really to go into proof of concept with clients who are interested in doing this. So essentially where we're going is there's two main phases to the proof of concept, but what we're doing is we're taking in FMB files at different levels, okay? So we're going to come in with something that's a pretty high level proof of concept and then something that's more detailed. We analyze the complexity of those, just validate how they're written. There's an array of standards, there's ways people have written forms over the years as they've evolved. We're analyzing the UX requirements gap, planning and advising around that, and I'll talk in a bit more detail before we get into a project, a live project. And then it's really Sentia and the customer team working post-conversion to bring it up to a real modern web app, which meets the requirements of the organization. But I suppose the pre-engagement piece on the proof of concept is a two-phased approach. So we take in 3 to 5 forms very quickly off people who are interested in doing this, and we can tell you within 30 minutes as to how complex the forms are, how they're written, what the kind of gaps will be in a UI. It takes no time for us to do it at all. The only thing we ask of this is people are sort of reasonable with the size of their forms. We've had a proof of concept, which I think was probably about 10 or 12 forms, nearly an entire application cobbled together, 62,000 lines of code. And okay, we can do it, but it's going to take a while. So we're trying to get to a point here, real quick, go through it, look and see, what sort of stage your form's at, and we can analyze within a day. Okay, this is worth something that we can do pretty quickly. The next phase of the proof of concept is essentially to get a cloud version of the database put up on AWS with some data in it, the database schema, all the PLL files, the different things which the forms typically reference. So we're building the database environment which you have in your application, we're building that up on AWS. And essentially we link the Morphis engine through to this converter, and then we can start actually converting live running the forms which the client has potentially given us. Okay, so it's a little bit more involved. It's a couple of days of setup time on the client side. Typically they're sort of organizing themselves and packaging things up for us, send it across, we can get it all up on AWS. And then after that proof of concept, which say we've carried out with an ISV recently in India, and they've got 4 or 5 of their forms completely converted from the engine point of view. So something that would take potentially one of the forms would probably take 15 to 20 weeks development, and we're talking that's been converted in like less than a day, essentially using the conversion process to the point of being out of the converter. And then you're looking at something whereby you're putting, again, the service wrapper in around that to bring it up to speed. Okay, so just in case all of that's been insanely boring, there's a quick recap. So your problem is you've got a ton of Oracle forms. You can't see the wood from the trees. Your team are capable guys, manly, hardworking, with an axe, beavering away, chipping away at this problem over an amount of time. We essentially build and maintain a chainsaw, but the only difference is there's nobody else in the world building and maintaining chainsaws at this time. And the Sentia service guys, they're the guys who can really use the chainsaw properly and get into these projects. Okay? So essentially, that's it. If there's any questions, I can take questions just while I'm getting this converter, see if the web has come back. Is there any questions there? No?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you do this, when you talk to customers about converting this in the cloud, do they get all kind of skeevy when you're asking them to do this in the cloud? Or is that just for trial data and it's not really production data?
Yeah, it's not really production data. So again, look, it's locked down and we sign NDAs. Like a lot of them are, even Oracle Forms applications are cloud hosted anyway. Well, they're hosted. It's not cloud, but they're hosted. So some of them are up in AWS. We haven't had any pushback. The only pushback we get about doing an actual cloud deployment is sometimes they say, look, we've got all this stuff internally. We'd like you to come in remotely and just do it, an on-premise one. But ideally, we know absolutely what they need in AWS. We can give them just, here's the 5 things you need to do it really quickly, and we can be up and running in a day rather than, a couple of anything other than that. Yeah, so let's see if we know what's going on. Yeah.
Could you talk about some of the reasons why organizations are interested in getting away from Oracle Forms?
Yeah, so I mean, just in terms of, first of all, you've got a Java download, a JRE file on every client machine that's running an Oracle Forms application. So if you're running 2 Oracle Forms applications and they're actually different in terms of the version of Oracle, you need 2 JRE files, 3 JRE files, 4 JRE files. And you have to actually change what your browser is going to use, potentially. Sometimes it happens automatically, sometimes it doesn't. So if you see a large organization like we would have been dealing with, some large universities in the UK, and they have a different actual machine, a different PC to run the finance application, a different PC to run the HR application if they're both in Oracle Forms. Java, that JRE download has been de-supported in Mozilla and in Chrome as it is now. IE are still supporting it, so it's not even supported technology for running the forms. The other thing is it wasn't built to be run over the web, so they're a bit clunky to run even now over a kind of a web application. The other reason, I suppose, just is aesthetically, you walk into a room full of people and you're trying to sell an application or you're trying to get users to use an application. And it used to be, only 5 people in the room had actually used software or were using software on a daily basis. Now everybody's using software on a daily basis, and users just won't put up with something that is so non-standard that your organization is going into these big change programs to train people how to use it. It's going into all this sort of stuff. So it really is a dying technology. Oracle are supporting it for an amount of time, just as it stands now. They're supporting it, they say they're supporting it, but they're trying to get clients onto ADF and Apex and technologies which are really, again, last generation. So what we're talking about doing is getting them onto native web, modern, future-proofed mobile, and people are talking about putting them onto. The only argument coming out of Oracle is putting them onto maybe something which has a shelf life of 2005, 2007 type of software, so that's the reason people are moving from it. I mean, the ISVs, because I worked for an ISV, this is where it came out of, and you could not sell an Oracle Forms application to users. You just couldn't, and we converted, we wrote this converter to convert that. And we actually had it was a 500% increase in sales. And you can see the stats because we'd moved the UI to Ext JS. It was one of the main reasons. Is that? That's the Wi-Fi. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
So the ending result, Ext JS application actually runs on the customer's system. It's not, you're not converting the form to putting the Ext JS app in a cloud, right? You're actually able to, when it all said and done, they're going to eventually run their Ext JS app in their own shop.
Yeah, if they want to, or they now have the option of moving to those to other technologies if they need to, if they want to run it in the cloud. But absolutely, you can run it in-house if you so wish. Are we online?
What's one of the main reasons why it takes a couple of designers 3 or 4 weeks to convert a form? Why does it take so long to convert an Oracle form manually?
It's
just crunching code?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, right, if you're doing it manually, you have to go and work out what the logic was behind the form, like what all the business rules are. That takes a long time. We've re-engineered systems where, there was one I remember which was, it was sickness rules for a bus company in Europe, and nobody in the company knew those rules anymore. So you've got to go through workshops and sort of work out what all the rules are again, and they were looking through old code to try and see what the code was doing. So we'll automate all of that process. And then you're just looking at, literally saying, okay, we've talked to a customer in the last while, a potential customer, who are just rewriting the whole thing from scratch. And yeah, it's a valid endeavor if you're changing and, you're doing something, but we can accelerate that so much. It takes forever to pick out the business logic, rewrite the front end, do all the testing and all that. Literally out of the box, we're cutting 80-90% of that. And we're really looking at UI and UX stuff after that. Okay guys, sorry, I don't know what's going on with the laptop and the internet. It was working fine up until this. But look, thanks for your attention. If there's any more questions, I'll take them. But other than that, I'm going to be around for the rest of the evening. If anybody wants to come up and talk and just ask questions about it, that's great. All right? Okay, thanks a million. Yes, thank you.